Today, we're here to announce America's Clean Power Plan, a plan 2 years in the making, and the single most important step America has ever taken in the fight against global climate change. Right now, our power plants are the source of about a third of America's carbon pollution. That's more pollution than our cars, our airplanes, and our homes generate combined. That pollution contributes to climate change, which degrades the air our kids breathe. But there have never been federal limits on the amount of carbon that power plants can dump into the air. Think about that. We limit the amount of toxic chemicals like mercury and sulfur and arsenic in our air or our water, and we're better off for it. But existing power plants can still dump unlimited amounts of harmful carbon pollution into the air. For the sake of our kids and the health and safety of all Americans, that has to change. For the sake of the planet, that has to change. So 2 years ago, I directed GINA and the Environmental Protection Agency to take on this challenge. And today, after working with states and cities and power companies, the EPA is setting the first ever nationwide standards to end the limitless dumping of carbon pollution from power plants. Here's how it works. Over the next few years, each state will have the chance to put together its own plan for reducing emissions, because every state has a different energy mix. Some generate more of their power from renewables, some from natural gas, or nuclear, or coal. And this plan reflects the fact that not everybody's starting in the same place. So we're giving states the time and the flexibility they need to cut pollution in a way that works for them. And we'll reward the states that take action sooner instead of later, because time is not on our side here. As states work to meet their targets, they can build on the progress that our communities and businesses are already making. A lot of power companies have already begun modernizing their plants, reducing their emissions, and, by the way, creating new jobs in the process. Nearly a dozen states have already set up their own market-based programs to reduce carbon pollution. About half of our states have set energy efficiency targets. More than 35 have set renewable energy targets. Over 1,000 mayors have signed an agreement to cut carbon pollution in their cities. And last week, 13 of our biggest companies, including UPS and Walmart and GM, made bold new commitments to cut their emissions and deploy more clean energy. So the idea of setting standards and cutting carbon pollution is not new. It's not radical. What is new is that starting today, Washington is starting to catch up with the vision of the rest of the country. And by setting these standards, we can actually speed up our transition to a cleaner, safer future. With this clean power plan, by 2030, carbon pollution from our power plants will be 32% lower than it was a decade ago. And the nerdier way to say that is that we'll be keeping 870 million tons of carbon dioxide pollution out of our atmosphere. The simpler layman's way of saying that is that it's like cutting every ounce of emission due to electricity from 108 million American homes. Or it's the equivalent of taking 166 million cars off the road. By 2030, we will reduce premature deaths from power plant emissions by nearly 90%. And thanks to this plan, there will be 90,000 fewer asthma attacks among our children each year. And by combining this with greater investment in our booming clean energy sector and smarter investments in energy efficiency, and by working with the world to achieve a climate agreement by the end of this year, we can do more to slow and maybe even eventually stop the carbon pollution that's doing so much harm to our climate. So this is the right thing to do. I want to thank again GINA and her team for doing it the right way. Over the longest engagement process in EPA history, they fielded more than 4 million public comments. They worked with states, they worked with power companies and environmental groups and faith groups and people across our country to make sure that what we were doing was realistic and achievable, but still ambitious. Let's be clear. There will be critics of what we're trying to do. There will be cynics that say it cannot be done. Long before the details of this clean power plan were even decided, the special interests and their allies in Congress were already mobilizing to oppose it with everything they've got. They will claim that this plan will cost you money even though this plan, the analysis shows, will ultimately save the average American nearly $85 a year on their energy bills. They'll claim we need to slash our investments in clean energy. It's a waste of money, even though they're happy to spend billions of dollars a year in subsidizing oil companies. They'll claim this plan will kill jobs, even though our transition to a cleaner energy economy has the solar industry, to just name one example, creating jobs 10 times faster than the rest of the economy. They'll claim this plan is a war on coal to scare up votes, even as they ignore my plan to actually invest in revitalizing coal country and supporting health care and retirement for coal miners and their families and retraining those workers for better paying jobs and healthier jobs. Communities across America have been losing coal jobs for decades. I want to work with Congress to help them, not to use them as a political football. Partisan press releases aren't going to help those families. Even more cynical, we've got critics of this plan who are actually claiming that this will harm minority and low-income communities, even though climate change hurts those Americans the most, who are the most vulnerable. Today, an African-American child is more than twice as likely to be hospitalized from asthma. A Latino child is 40% more likely to die from asthma. So if you care about low-income minority communities, start protecting the air that they breathe and stop trying to rob them of their health care. You could also expand Medicaid in your states, by the way. That would help. Here's the thing. We've heard these same stale arguments before. Every time America's made progress, it's been despite these kinds of claims. Whenever America has set clear rules and smarter standards for our air, our water, our children's health, we get the same scary stories about killing jobs and businesses and freedom. Sometimes I think we feel as if there's nothing we can do. And in thinking about what we were doing here today, I was reminded about landing in Los Angeles to attend college as a freshman, as an 18-year-old. Late August, I was moving from Hawaii. I got to the campus and I decided I had a lot of pent-up energy and I wanted to go take a run. And after about 5 minutes, suddenly I had this weird feeling like I couldn't breathe. And the reason is back in 1979, Los Angeles still was so full of smog. There were days where people who were vulnerable just could not go outside, and they were fairly frequent. And folks who are older than me can remember, the Cuyahoga River burning because of pollution. And acid rain threatening to destroy all the great forests of the Northeast. And you fast forward 30, 40 years later, and we solved those problems. But at the time, the same characters who are going to be criticizing this plan were saying this is going to kill jobs. This is going to destroy businesses. This is going to hurt low-income people. It's going to be wildly expensive. And each time they were wrong. And because we pushed through, despite those scaremongering tactics, you can actually run in Los Angeles without choking. And folks can actually take a boat out on that river. Those forests are there. So we got to learn lessons. We got to know our history. The kinds of criticisms that you're going to hear are simply excuses for inaction. They're not even good business sense. They underestimate American business and American ingenuity. In 1970, when Republican President Richard Nixon decided to do something about the smog that was choking our cities, they warned that the new pollution standards would decimate the auto industry. It didn't happen. Catalytic converters worked. Taking the lead out of gasoline worked. Our air got cleaner. In 1990, when Republican President George H.W. Bush decided to do something about acid rain, said the bills would go up, our lights would go off, businesses would suffer a quiet death. It didn't happen. We cut acid rain dramatically, and it cost much less than anybody expected because businesses, once incentivized, were able to figure it out. When we restricted leaded fuel in our cars, cancer-causing chemicals in plastics, it didn't end the oil industry, it didn't end the plastics industry. American chemists came up with better substitutes. The fuel standards we put in place a couple of years ago didn't cripple automakers. The American auto industry retooled Today, our automakers are selling the best cars in the world at a faster pace than they have in almost a decade. They've got more hybrids and more plug-ins and more high fuel-efficient cars, giving consumers more choice than ever before and saving families at the pump. We can figure this stuff out as long as we're not lazy about it, as long as we don't take the path of least resistance. Scientists, citizens, workers, entrepreneurs, together as Americans, we disrupt those stale old debates, upend old ways of thinking. Right now, we're inventing whole new technologies, whole new industries, not looking backwards, we're looking forwards. And if we don't do it, nobody will. The only reason that China is now looking at getting serious about its emissions because they saw that we were going to do it too. When the world faces its toughest challenges, America leads the way forward. That's what this plan is about. I don't want to fool you here. This is going to be hard, dealing with climate change in its entirety. It's challenging. No single action, no single country will change the warming of the planet on its own. But today, with America leading the way, countries representing 70% of the carbon pollution from the world's energy sector have announced plans to cut their greenhouse gas emissions. In December, with America leading the way, we have a chance to put in place one of the most ambitious international climate agreements in human history. And it's easy to be cynical and to say climate change is the kind of challenge that's just too big for humanity to solve. I am absolutely convinced that's wrong. We can solve this thing, but we have to get going. It's exactly the kind of challenge that's big enough to remind us that we're all in this together. Last month, for the first time since 1972, NASA released a blue marble, a single snapshot of the Earth taken from outer space. There are more than 7 billion people alive today. No matter what country they're from, no matter what language they speak, every one of them can look at this image and say, that's my home. And we're the first generation to feel the impact of climate change. We're the last generation that can do something about it. We only get one home. We only get one planet. There's no plan B. I don't want my grandkids not to be able to swim in Hawaii or not to be able to climb a mountain and see a glacier because we didn't do something about it. I don't want millions of people's lives disrupted and this world more dangerous because we didn't do something about it. That'd be shameful of us. This is our moment to get this right and leave something better for our kids. Let's make most of that opportunity. Thank you, everybody. God bless you.